Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. Joining us today for a very special Rappler talk is a visitor to Manila for a very short period of time. His name is Henry CEO. He's got honorable on the card. He ran the Obama campaign, CEO of the Obama campaign, and then worked at the White House under the Obama administration. He is now also the global vice president for Ashoka. Welcome to Manila, Henry.
Thank you.
Changemaker effect. Well, first, tell me, what did you learn from running this campaign? What lessons learned for leadership?
So there were some surprising lessons, actually. So I think going into mostly lessons around leadership at the time. So I think going into the campaign, I would have said that I was an empowering leader, a welcoming leader. I wanted everyone to step into their leadership. But I'd also say that the framework that I carried, I think we all carry, is this one leader at a time framework. Yeah. It's like the one I learned in school.
Yep.
It's the one I got from my history books. It's the one my dad, taught me, be a leader, don't be a follower, right? So, and the Obama campaign grew up traditionally, despite the, innovative nature that we projected, we actually grew up siloed and hierarchical. Because he announced, and 6 weeks later, we actually opened our headquarters and built the organization. So you get people in lanes and you build it up. And that worked for a while as we were trying to catch up to the crushing demands on us. But over the course of the campaign, something happened that flipped my view of leadership on its head. And that was that change was actually, it was running faster than we could keep up with.
Yeah.
And we had to open up the organization and really, instead of having these 8 or 9 silo leaders, we called them department heads, we actually had to open up the organization and let everyone step into their leadership. And in that moment, we moved from a one leader at a time system to an everyone leads in every moment system. And that's actually a big deal for a campaign, which doesn't like risk.
Yeah.
And in that, so what I saw was that people in the lower and middle rungs of the organization, when they're freed to lead and step into their bigness, they actually worked kind of fluidly across the organization around those old silos to solve problems and pursue new opportunities. And so there were some actually interesting lessons in leadership for me on that, which was, one, when you have an everyone lead system, everyone has to step into their bigness. Right? So in the old system, one person big, everyone else small.
Yeah.
Any moment. In this system, everyone has to step into their bigness. You're only as big as the smallest among you. The second lesson was, innovation. We were known for being very innovative for our use of technology and social media. But actually, innovation was a very human thing. Because when people tear down walls between 2 or more sides that wouldn't otherwise connect, that's when innovation happens. Right? So sometimes technology can tear down that wall. For us, it was myBarackObama.com. It was a platform that tore down walls and brought people together. Sometimes technology is the result of a team coming together. Yeah. Like we need an app for that, so there's a team. But innovation was a very human thing. The third and final lesson I got from this new world of everyone leads was that you would have thought we could have gotten control of change as we opened up the organization, right? And now everybody is on this. In fact, change actually sped up. It was faster, but it was also more omnidirectional, because this is what I refer to now as the changemaker effect. Change actually accelerates relative to the one leader at a time system, because if you agree that everything you change changes everything, leaders change things, right?
Yeah,
if you agree that everything you change changes everything, and everyone is doing it, then you're in a changemaker system, and that's explosive, and it's going all over the place. And the reason why those lessons were so important for me was when I came out into the world, after 5 years between the campaign and the White House, coming out of my bubble, and I'm looking at things with fresh eyes and in this new lens, what I realized was the world suddenly looked more like my Obama 2.0.
Yeah, absolutely.
The everyone leads than the Obama 1.0.
Interesting.
And there's polar opposite physics involved here.
So let's unpack this.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, for anyone running an organization, right? There's the individual leadership, and then there's organizational dynamics of it. Because I think in the past, you think that how are you able to get this kind of ad hocracy, right? How are you able to get that to move in the same direction? If everybody is a leader leading from the middle, how are they not running all over the place?
Yeah,
how do you get it to move in the same direction?
And because this would have not been something I would have, as a leader of an organization, I would have said, this is what we need to do.
Right.
Especially,
but
again,
necessary when change is happening so fast.
Well, yeah, and campaigns are, to your point, campaigns we're very risk averse.
Yeah.
So we would probably, typically the campaign would be designed more as a command and control type of organization. This happened, I think, there's two things going on. One is, if toward the end of the campaign, I had a friend and mentor ask me, he had been in 4 administrations, and he's now a professor at Harvard, and he asked me, he said, what's the key to your success? We hadn't won yet at that point, but he said, what's been the key to your success? And I said to him, I said, you know, when I look around me, what I see are people with an innovative mind, a service heart, an entrepreneurial spirit, and a collaborative outlook. And in fact, that wasn't just the staff, it's actually what the Obama campaign wasn't successful so much for what we aspired to, as to what we actually tapped in the society, right? So that was one element of this. The other, to your point about the organization, was in the very earliest days, and just to give you context about this campaign, we grew, there's 3 phases.
Yeah.
The hope and chaos, the early days of hope and chaos,
right,
when you're building this thing from scratch.
Right.
The competition with Hillary.
Yeah.
The middle days. So those are the days of change on steroids.
Yes.
And then you have change at scale. And those early days we were probably running with about, I don't know, maybe 1,500 staff, maybe $7 million a month budget.
Wow, okay.
And then if you would have caught us going through through those middle days, $40 million a month, maybe 2,000 staff. So in the first 16 months, we grew to 2,000 staff and $40 million a month. In the last 16 weeks, we went from 2,000 staff to 6,000 staff. And we went from $40 million a month to $100 million. So to your question, how did we do it?
Yeah. How do you keep it on track?
How do you keep it on track?
Hold all of these leaders together.
Yeah, so he gave us guidance in the earliest days that stuck with us all the way through, that created a cultural norm. 3 pieces of guidance. One, build it from the bottom up.
Yeah.
That really leads to everyone a leader.
Right.
Respect everyone, which is the early formation of the collaborative nature. And the famous one, no drama. Right? And to me, folks of us in campaign management also run it like a business. So we were a campaign that was known for our innovation and our discipline. Usually organizations have one or the other, right? And when we had that cultural norm, it also meant those were the kind of people we started to attract. So, and one of them interesting...
Is there an age to it? I mean, are there people who adapted to it more?
I think that it was an expectation. What happened was when we moved into everyone a leader, right?
Yeah.
You know, those early days of silo commanding is, you know, how you run a silo is basically you keep work out and you keep morale up.
Right, right.
And that doesn't allow you to have cross-cutting collaboration. So when we moved to this everyone a leader system, we moved away from permission-based and moved toward trust-based. And that meant that you had to have this cultural expectation. And when everyone's a leader, everyone's a stakeholder. And when everyone's a stakeholder, everyone's a steward. And so the community sort of began to monitor itself to make sure that rogue behavior wasn't happening. And we went through the whole campaign without, you know, random
self-regulating. Seriously, no politics in politics?
Right, it was amazing. I'm telling you, this is all observation, right? I would have never predicted any of this. But when we came out of the campaign, we had no rogue activity, nobody signing random contracts, nobody opening random offices, nobody hiring staff that wasn't already through the system in the way. So we set the expectations and then people lived by them.
Is that because it was mission-driven? And not business driven?
I think, well, you know, I think really what it was that we had an expectation amongst us, and it was partly mission driven, right? We had a candidate, and we all. But those are also when things can go really bad, right? I mean, that's when actually win at all costs actually comes into play.
Yeah.
So, but I think what I'm finding is the reason why I think this is important is that as society is going through this change, what was the really fundamental thing, I think, to your question is. Empathy-based ethics became the cornerstone for how we lived and worked together. Because remember, when everyone is making change, right? Remember the changemaker effect. When leaders make change, and if everyone is making change, it's explosive, it's omnidirectional, and rules can't keep up.
Yes, absolutely.
I was the rule maker, so I can tell you that I had to find a different way to keep control of the organization, and that was about making sure that your change was, your leadership and your change making was done responsibly. with a 360 vision, not 2020 vision. That's the old leader, right? The new
Yeah.
leaders has to have, and everyone a leader, that means everyone has to have 360 vision. So empathy-based ethics is totally in play in this new environment.
How do you deal with when one chunk of it, if you're thinking about this as like an amoeba moving in one direction, right? When one chunk wants to move this way, and when there's conflict, how did you deal with it?
Well, I think everybody had an eye on, everybody had to, I think one way you deal with it, let's go back to the principles of leadership. Old leader, one leader at a time. New leader, new leadership, everyone leading in every moment. One person big, everyone else small in any moment, everyone stepping into their bigness. Teams based on functional responsibilities. For every problem, a different department. Teams based on everybody stepping up and around their talents and capacities. For every problem, a new team. Information made available on a need-to-know basis. Full information so everybody gets it. So to your point, you have to be able to have everybody having the full context, not partially doling out in a sort of in chunks to different people. Everyone has to have all the information. The physics of these two systems are polar opposite.
You know, the reason I'm so fascinated with this is these are very similar principles that we had in Rappler, but do you think that you would have, so a campaign runs for a short period of time, could this have been sustained through an organization, and how does it shift when it becomes, when you actually codify some of these things?
I think it lasted all the way through the 8 years of his administration.
Really? Okay.
Because, you know, we had 6,000 people who grew up in this system, and we brought that into the organization, but also people brought that into their careers. It's one of the reasons why I'm sitting here today working for Ashoka talking about everyone at Changemaker, is because I'm still compelled by what we discovered, and I actually see that it's totally relevant to the world we're in. And also if you think about it, the campaign went through so many changes in this 21-month period. I'll give you one story. I remember when he selected Joe Biden to be his vice president. And I thought, wow, this is a not-so-changed type of guy, right? He was in the Senate for 40 years, and there was like a Washington, and we're the outsiders. But if you actually think about his hire, his most important hire in the campaign, somebody who respected everyone, somebody who believed and built it from the bottom up. He was an everyday guy, took the train to work every day to Washington. And no drama. He was the easiest person to bring in. Joe Biden was all those things.
Guys, no drama.
It was in, yeah, that's right. It was in everything that we did, from how we worked in the field to how important hires were made, or any hire generally.
So again, I think that this is a challenge for every organization, because the success of the past was in this replication, the bureaucracy of a company and that top-down leadership. What advice would you give to large organizations, 60,000 strong, who are trying to pivot into this new world?
And some are not trying to pivot, right? Which is the bigger problem.
But those who are trying to pivot, because shifting from that bureaucracy to what made you successful in the past to this new thing is extremely challenging. Right?
The first walls you have to tear down are in your mind.
Right.
Because we're carrying forward all this old game stuff into the new game.
So a new culture. But you also, a campaign, it's a startup in its own, right? But if you had, let's say, you know, I don't know, like any huge company that's trying to pivot, what advice would you give?
The first thing is, you have to see, like we did, that the people walking through your doors are change makers, not customers. If you're a teacher, you have to see change makers walking in. Those second graders, there's change makers walking in your doors, not students, right? If you're a parent in the household, you have to see change makers in your family system. And that's the first thing. The second thing you have to see is the game has changed, right? Absolutely. And to your point, we are coming through millennia of repetition. I'll use my American example. George Washington, the family farm, repetition, 1700s. Ben Franklin, the craft. Get a skill, take that skill inside 4 walls for life, repetition.
Correct.
The industrialist, Abraham Lincoln. You get an idea, we'll copy you and make you rich, repetition. Henry Ford, the assembly line. All of our institutions were built for repetition. All of our organizational thinking was built for repetition.
And efficiency, getting repetition leads you to efficiency.
Exactly. And now that we're in a changemaker world, if you're a business, we're seeing studies that are showing that in the life of a company in the first 5 years, they're failing faster. We're seeing companies, the landscape is moving. You have to have an agile workforce. You have to see this as an imperative, not a nice to do. It's a must do. It's a must do. That means the only key performance indicator that you should care about now is how many of my people are change makers, because we're working in a change maker landscape.
How many of my people are change makers?
That's got to be your number one question. If you
You're
are,
smiling.
that's the number one question for every household, for every schoolyard, for every company, for every community, for every nation. How many of my people are change makers? Now you get into the question of how do I do it? And what we've seen from the world's leading change makers, and I've studied change makers past, like Florence Nightingale, and I get the chance to work with change makers present, the social entrepreneurs I work with at Ashoka. There's a very key framework for working in this new world. Empathy, empathy-based ethics, co-creative teamwork, not functional teams, recruiting people based on their capacities and their talents, not their labels.
Yeah.
New leadership where everyone on the team is a player, no one is passive, not like the old way, and change making put to work for the good of all. And one of the things I get to see every day since I've been with Ashoka for 6 years is the world's leading change makers that we select. I see how they work, and then I get to share that out to companies and organizations. But you're very right, this is not easy work
Absolutely
to make that
not.
pivot.
I mean, because, so if someone sticks out, is used to an older style of management, which is top down, what do you do? Do you try to change them? Do you let them go?
No, I think we can bring people along, but I think the key is, the one thing that I think we're missing in all this, and it's not a small thing, is the new nature, the new nature of change. The historical shift is not that change is faster. I mean, Henry VIII was complaining about the speed of change in the 1500s, right? The key ad is that we're all making change now. Look, here's the thing. We've got rising individual agency.
Yeah.
We've got these tools that have I've got my printing press here. I've got my, I can be a broadcaster in a moment. I can be a first responder, right? So I've got the tools that help me act on my agency that were once available to a few. And you've got the democratization of leadership. Once you see that that's what's contributing to explosive omnidirectional change, not repetitive, linear, faster change, you can bring that person along because all they have to do is see the new game. But once you see the new game, you've got to play it. And so then how do you get into this new game? And that's, I think it's easier when people see the shift because we all do I do think we tapped something that was real. Innovative mind, service heart, entrepreneurial spirit, collaborative outlook. All I need to see is what the new game is. I can get into that game because I have the DNA for that.
I love this, and we can talk more about this, but let me talk about the other part of it, which is because there is so much change, sometimes people hold on to the past. And let me bring this out to politics, right? Because obviously there was so much change under the Obama administration that there was a pendulum swing that came back that brought a Trump to the presidency, right? So how do you find that balance when you're taking a society along where there is stability and there is change?
So I'll give you an analogy. It's probably not a good one, but I'll give it to you anyways. It's a sports analogy, so it's already the conversation's going to go down really fast.
Oh,
and
no.
It's an American sports analogy.
Okay, go.
But okay, so there's a football player. It's an American football player. He's getting ready for the game. He's prepared his whole life for the game. Puts on his pads, puts on his helmet. He's going to charge out on the field and join his teammates. Now, he gets out there and suddenly he discovers that the 2 goalposts are down, these 2 nets are up. The people out on the field, they don't wear the same heavy gear as him. They got light clothing and flowing hair, and they're chasing after a different football that spins out a black and white pattern. To your question, there's 3 responses that this athlete can have, right? One is he'll probably either stand frozen, doesn't know what to do, and he'll get moved to the sidelines, which he's been wired to play, so we don't know what happens then. Or he can double down on what he's always known, right, which is a natural response. And that means he's going to tackle those people in the flowing hair and light clothing, and that'll make him dangerous and worrisome. He'll get pushed into the sidelines. Or he can calibrate into this new game, which means taking off that armor, get a new playbook, train new muscles. You need the new rules because the old rules won't work in the new game. The difference between the question you're asking and my football players, he can see the game has changed. We are intuiting something, and it's very messy, and politics might be going back and forth, and yes, maybe some people are in stage 3 or some are in stage 2, but once we all see the new game, I think we will calibrate into that. And I'll just say, I don't think our political leaders see this shift, and they're not talking about it, so we're not actually able to go there. So it's hard to link politics to what I'm talking about because it's still very fuzzy and gray for all of us.
I'm curious about it because I think, especially in the United States, we've seen so much change, and we've also seen people who feel like they weren't part of it. And that seems, and we've seen that in every society, including here in the Philippines, right? That anger that gets then fomented. How do you deal with that in a society?
I think it's clarity. I think when people see where we're going, if you knew that your kid was going into a world that we can't yet see, wouldn't you do something differently?
Yeah.
I mean, so again, built for repetition. My kids, 10 and 8, they go to a good school, but they are on an assembly line to everyone a vocation. At year 12 or year 16, they're supposed to get a job. But when Dante and Zane went into kindergarten, we knew that 65% of job types that they would assume don't yet exist. So they're on an assembly line to everyone a vocation when they need to be on an experiential journey toward everyone a changemaker. All we need is clarity, and we will actually start to crowdsource ideas around our kids, our businesses, how we actually work our communities. So I just think it's clarity about the new game, and I think people, no matter what, they're not going to cling to what they know they need to go to. They're only clinging because they don't know what's happening.
No, I agree with you, and I love. So let me bring it out even broader, right? Because in the end. So part of, I think, what's driving this, the Obama campaign tapped this, is the role of technology. But technology now is shifting. It's going to take away jobs of people. Right? So it's going to go to through this phase where people will not know, and they will feel left out, and there will be anger, and governments are going to have to deal with this.
Absolutely. You're right about this.
Artificial intelligence, right? I think in the United States they're talking about
4 million jobs driving truck drivers. Exactly.
I mean, so in that kind of thing. So, sorry, I took you. I think this works organizationally. So in this new world, how do we deal with this?
I totally agree. We need to start a global conversation about what does it mean to be in a world of dynamic, disruptive change, which is the polar opposite of our world of repetition. We need to get business leaders in this conversation. We need to get educators in this conversation. Ultimately, this will flow into all the different areas, including parenting and so forth. And then we need to talk about what do we need to actually be able to live in this world? What are the skills we need? What's the ethos that we need to embed? And again, I go right back to the framework we need for the new game. It's a new playbook for the new game. Empathy, because this is a world that's it's a world of interaction, not transaction. Empathy-based ethics, because rules can't keep up with the pace of change, so we're going to have to rely on each other's good intentions. That's one thing. Co-creative teamwork, forming teams, learning to form teams around these challenging problems and new opportunities. New leadership, thinking differently about leadership in our world, and then so it's a simple framework. Empathy, teamwork, new leadership, change making. You can build that ethos into everything, and technology can help us with empathy. We've got VR. Right, I can actually now go to the coral reefs of someplace far away, see the living ones, see the dying ones. So we can build our empathy muscle really fast with technology if we just put a priority on this.
I love that idea, but let's talk about a really dark world now, and this is happening in the United States. Disinformation, information warfare, and actually it's the new generation, the people, the millennials who are coming in and may have their first instance with politics, the 240 million Americans who got Russian messages during the campaign. In empathy, you're talking about the things that are here. How do you deal with the dark side of this fast pace of change where, a country like Russia decides to just change the reality?
Yeah. Well, look, we all just got these tools at our fingertips, so we're learning how to use them.
Yeah.
And I remain very hope and changeful here. I don't think millennials are going to let us get away with this very long. Right? I think this is the generation. Now, we have to also remember, we did give them the old playbook.
Yeah.
But they have a new set of values. They have a new outlook. They see what's happening, and I think this is going to be a phase. I really think this is going to go by fast. But I do think it requires a dedicated effort at this framework of empathy and co-creative teamwork and new leadership, where everyone is a player, everyone understands their responsibility, and a commitment to change making put to work for good. And that's where I'm leaning in on a simple thing, but I think this is a simple thing we can bake in.
No, I'm glad that you can bring it down, but
yeah.
I'll ask you though, in the end, in this time period of extreme creative destruction, right? In this time period, global geopolitics, we just watched the ASEAN, the 50th anniversary of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations here. And the way politics was being conducted, the way geopolitical power bound, it's very old still.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, how do you see this impacting at that level? And do you see any moves that way at all?
I think, again, if we look at how to maybe help us through this transition, to your point, I think institutions are going to be the last to come into the new game because they were built for another game, right? Yeah. So it's going to have to be a real dedicated conversation by our global leaders saying, this is the new game, what do we need to get in it? And we've got to be serious about this. It's got to get into our conversation jet stream. Then we'll see if an education minister says change making is the new literacy, which we've had 4 or 5 say this. Yeah. That opens up the space for educators to start saying, okay, how do I innovate into this new space of change making? How do I become a change maker versus a teacher, right? And then you start to see public demand. And again, I think millennials are going to lead the way on this. I am very hope and changeful about this upcoming generation because they see this, they're working with these tools, they got a moral compass. Right? And then you have institutions come along after people are there. I don't think institutions are going to lead the way here. And I do think a lot of our bad behavior might still live in some of those areas and not necessarily, but again, I think I see this as a 4, not necessarily step by step, but there's 4 elements to this. Changing the conversation, innovating into the new game, public demand, institution change.
Fantastic. Let's talk about the millennial. Let's talk about the kids who are coming of age in this time where they're bombarded with information. Yeah. Social media is coming at them. They can't tell fact from fiction. Yeah. Or they have their own ideas about what they want. Yeah. Right? I remember when I was really young and it was a much easier world to grow up in. What are they facing? How do you move them to a place that builds empathy?
Yeah, how do we do that? So here's where I love the world today, is we have individual agency with tools and the democratization of leadership. We don't have to wait for an institution to step in here. We can do it, right? And I'll give you, again, I love to go back to my community of social entrepreneurs, the group I work with at Ashoka. In 1996, a mom took 13 girls on a run in North Carolina. Neighborhood girls, they weren't in her family. She did this, and this is, by the way, before the simple world, right? She was worried about the messaging that young preteen women were getting, preteen girls were getting, that was defining them into what she called society's girl box before they had a chance to define themselves. She took those 13 girls on a run, and she built a mentoring program alongside that training, and that became the seed of an idea for Girls on the Run, which today now has put 1.5 million women through a program of mentoring and training to get young women to define themselves before they get defined. And that's just one example. We can all take this on, and this was before we had all the tools of our time, right? Molly Barker did that, and so I could give you probably example after example of citizen actors taking on the challenge that you just gave us. But we have to commit ourselves to it, and we can all do our part.
Citizen. So this kind of optimism, it's fantastic to see. I mean, this kind of optimism, we would believe a little bit more before 2016. And I go back to 2016 as the place where even when students, when organizations get organized on social media, now it's the fragmentation that seems to be there.
Yeah, but I think I see it in the world today, and I don't think this is rose-colored glasses. I see what's happening with the Me Too movement.
It's true.
What's really sad right now about our media is that we're focusing on, this is something that was interesting. I was having a conversation with my 8-year-old trying to figure, who are the role models for him? Right?
Who are?
Well, he couldn't think of, we were together trying to think, he said Michelle Obama and he said me, which was nice. But after that, the media has glommed onto a few people who are actually talking about destroying everything, or, talking destructively about everything around them. And our young people don't have role models right now. When a few years ago, you could point to the vice president, you could point to a few people in government, a few people in sports, you could point to people, Beyonce. Suddenly now, we just have lost that. And I think that is somewhere, where the media we try to make sense of the world through the media's lens.
Yeah.
The media has to show the things that are really happening, where people really are making change, and that's why I'm excited about things like solutions journalism, which actually shows us how to create change in a changemaker world, gives us information we can use, and that's where the media parts of the media are starting to go. But I think that if we look at our news every night, right, in the mainstream media's news every night, I think we're not getting the full story. But I see a lot of change making going on. It's just not being shown.
So not having role models, though, let me go back to that. Is that also partly a function of the fact that the world is changing so fast, that the ability to adapt, the ability to plot what the next... I think about the new young journalists coming in today, and I try to figure out their world is significantly different from when I was coming out, right? Is that part of this period of time, or...? I
think you're right about that. I think on some level, the world of standouts, of expertise, is kind of blending into this hybrid landscape that we're moving into.
So that's the other part, right? If expertise doesn't matter, where do people go?
But it does, right? Because we can be allies.
That's the way
we can start looking, if we start really thinking about it, we can talk about people in our neighborhood, and actually my kids do have people who are really allies of theirs, or champions of them. And so why should we look to the TV set or to the news when we can actually look around us and see the adults? But it is true. When I came up, I had Walter Cronkite telling me that's the way it was on my TV screen.
Yeah, exactly. The world of authority,
anymore,
right? Yeah. We don't believe in authority.
Right. Well, they've gone, right, they blended into I had an astronaut who could go to the moon and tell me, it's just we've got to rethink everything. To your point, we just have to rethink everything about this changemaker world, because it's the polar opposite of our repetition past, including how we look for our allies and our mentors.
I love this. So we have a question coming in, and guys, if you have any questions, please tweet at Rappler.com. Let's use hashtag Changemaker. We should have talked about that earlier.
Yeah,
but
that's a good one.
A question from Bong Santisteban, a young gentleman who wants to change the world.
All right, do it.
His question is, how do we create an environment that brings out the best in people and will make them changemakers? Because we see the worst in people coming out, right?
Total point.
This is a young...
How old are you? Can you say?
He's 19 years old.
But no, right? What can we learn from our younger learners? This is exactly the point. It is all in the environment. Now, let's just remember, I remember as a kid, grown-ups, my kids call us grown-ups. Grown-ups would say to us when we were kids, like, don't be too big for your britches, don't think you're a big shot. We were actually taught to be small. Because that was the world, in the world that I was going to graduate into, you get in your lane, you do your job, you don't go outside the lines lest you risk making waves. Now we're in a world that if you stay inside the lines, you're going to be penalized. This is a world where you have to move fluidly outside of those old boundaries. So how do we create, but to this gentleman's point, we have created a world where all of our institutions and our organizations and our mindsets are from our past. They're not built for everyone to step into their bigness, right? And so we need to create that environment. And again, I'll just go back. What's the ethos you need in your community, in your household, in your schoolyard, in your organization, in your country? It's got to be empathy, co-creative teamwork, new leadership where everyone is stepping up, and change, and the imperative for change making put to work for the good of all. You create that environment, and I lived that. I've already told you my 3-year experience with that. If you're 19 and you're going into the world, make that your mission to create. The biggest change you can create is create the culture where people can be changed, the change makers that we are.
So let me bring it to the Philippines, where the culture is still very much respect your elders. It's top down. I mean, and I see this in our generations coming up, right? They have a lot of energy, but yet they bump against the older folks who have the authority, right? So what changes in culture from American to Filipino? Number one, we're taught to, don't speak unless you're spoken to. More power driven.
We were taught that.
And then the second one is when you don't have power and you're the younger person, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, no. So I think, well, look, we were dealing with the same issues in my childhood, right? So it's hard for me to make any comparison, but what I would say is that this is exactly the thing that we need to say out loud, right? And we need to start talking about. look, I actually asked, I'll tell you a story about my 5-year-old. I was going to meet a famous author in New York City, and I said to him, I said, you know, I'm nervous about meeting this guy. And my 5-year-old, at the time he was 5, he said, why are you afraid? I said, I think I'm a bit shy. And he asked me what shy meant. And I said, so I explained it to him, and he looked at his feet and he said, oh, Dad, I'm shy. And I said, oh, Dante, but if you think about that, that's true. But look at all the things we're missing out if we're shy. And Dante stopped me and he said, Dad, I have 3 things for you to ask your friend. He said, ask him his favorite tall building in New York City. Great. Ask him his favorite food. Okay. And then what's the 3rd question? Ask him how he's doing. I met this guy. I said, don't get up. I got 3 questions for you. And what happened was, what's your favorite tall building? Okay. What's your favorite food? He's like, what's going on? I said, 1 more question. How are you doing? He said, okay. But Dante gave me strategies for how to overcome my own shyness. And by the way, Dante's not shy anymore. There's so much we can learn if we stop being authoritative toward our kids, right? And bring them into the conversation. It's just a mindset shift. We have to say this is a new game. It requires something new. If we don't give our children the ability to step into their bigness, to this person's point, then they're not going to succeed in this new world where you have to be big, not allow yourself to be small. So it's just about seeing differently, and then we can adapt into this. Even us authoritative types can do that.
And how do you institutionalize this in a company like Ashoka?
Well, we've been doing, I mean, well, first of all, we get the benefit of seeing social entrepreneurs in action. We learn this from them. Yeah. But to your point, we have had to go through our own changes. Yeah. You know, we have been a 40-year organization that has sourced the world's leading social entrepreneurs. Now we're in the everyone a changemaker game. Yeah. That is a total mission shift, a total pivot. We had to think differently about ourselves. Am I a social entrepreneur finder, or am I a movement builder for this new framework? We had to go through all these things, but we did create a culture where we said we have to try things. We know we're going to fail. We're critical with each other. We have a pretty open environment where we say this doesn't seem to be working. Sometimes it's a little more uncomfortable for me than I would like, but that's the reality, right? And we're moving through this shift just like any other organization. But we said up front, we have to see differently. We have to do differently. That means we have to structure ourselves differently. We need new incentives. It's just like my football player. We're going to have to work some muscles that we haven't been working. But the first walls that have to come down are the walls in our heads.
Fantastic. Guys, are you on Twitter? Are you on Facebook?
I am on Twitter, yeah.
So let's give, we're going to have to finish, I guess, in just the last parts for Filipinos, since you're in the Philippines now. You know, we're going through dynamic change as well. And a lot of we've been looking at technology for development, social media for social good. But what we've seen in 2016 really are the algorithms of Facebook actually may not lead to the best democracy now. What advice would you give for us as we go through this period of
I think we're all going through this, right? It's funny, by the way, to your last question, somebody asked this question last night at the event I did, another event I did, and he said, can Asia make this pivot? Because we have all the things that you were talking about. But I will tell you, I have to tell you that I've been here for only a couple days. And we had 400 people come out last night, and we had, you know, we've had many different conversations with many different types of folks here. Based on what I've seen over just 2 days, number one, I see change makers. I ask people, I'll say, hold up your hand if you're this. Innovative mind, service heart, entrepreneurial spirit, collaborative outlook, hands go up, right? I'm pretty sure Asia's not sitting this movement out. And I do think, though, so then I think the question to your point is, how do we become more intentional? Yeah. And I think once we're more intentional about saying it's a new game, got to play differently, be very open about how hard that is, and just put a real premium. The new social currency is change making. The new premium is innovative mind, service heart, entrepreneurial spirit, collaborative outlook. The new framework is empathy, teamwork, new leadership, change making. These are physics. It's easy. Just work on the basics, right? It's just like my football player. If you're going to go in the new game, just work on the basics, and you can play this game.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you for your thoughts. We've been speaking with Henry, the CEO. Guys, check him out on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you have any other questions, we can funnel them along. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us. We went all over the...